Bi kar začel čas. Hvala vsem, da ste prišli. Nam je veliko veselje, da imamo med nami enega vodilnih svetovnih strokovnjakov, kar se tiče konfliktov med medvedi in pa ljudmi, prav dr. Sefa Wilsona. Sef je drugače, deluje predvsem v okviru ene nevladne organizacije, People and Carnivores, je pa hkrati predavatelj na Yale University občasno. On povabil smo predvsem zato, ker imamo zelo velike izkušnje iz zelo podobnega okolja, kot je pri nas. Prav gre za, ko sem tudi predstavil bolj natančen, to podeželski del Montane, sprav gre za tako krajino, ker se prepletajo gozdovi, tudi nekaj naravnih rezervatov in pa naselja. In smo imeli v preteklosti zelo veliko problemov z medvedi. Potem si po zadnjih letih zelo dobro uspeli reševati, tako da nam nekako predstavil to svojo zgodbo, kako jim je to uspeva. Je pa zdaj že kar nekaj časa v Sloveniji. En teden se vsak dan podimo po terenu, gledamo tiste ključne točke, do katerih prihaja problemov pred nas, tako da ima tudi kar nekaj dosti dobrih idej, kaj bi se dalo tudi pri nas narediti. Zdaj prišel sem v bistvu v okviru organizacije IBA, to je ta mednarodna organizacija za raziskovanje in pa upravljanje z medvedi, ki so nekako podprli to izmenjavo, predvsem z namenom prenosa izkušenj iz Amerike v Slovenijo, vse pa tudi obratno. Tako da jaz ne bi zdaj predolg, ki bi predal besedo Sefu, predanje bo v angleščini, bomo potem pa kasneje imeli pa vprašanja, če bo kaj natančne še zanimali, lahko tudi podastavil to vprašanje v slovenščini, bomo potem prevedli. Je pa kar prosim Sefa, please. Thanks.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Miha, for that. I trust it was a nice introduction, but I just have to trust him. He's a very, very, very thoughtful host, and just want to thank everyone in Slovenia so far. I've had a wonderful 7 days in your country. I've seen the mountains, I've seen the sea, and I've seen the Dinaric Mountains, and I've seen and visited with some very lovely people in between. So it's an honor to be here, and I think as Miha explained, we hope that this is the beginning of a future exchange between Slovenia and the U.S., and hopefully we can learn from each other. I will bring home lessons to the United States, and in a small way, maybe I have something that we can share, particularly when we think about reducing human-bear conflicts in rural agricultural communities, much like we have here in Slovenia and where I live in Montana, in the western part of the United States. So I'd just like to, again, thank you, and it's great to be here at the University of Ljubljana. So when we think about fundamental problems for recovering carnivores, whether we're in Europe or in the United States, I would say there are three important components we need to think about. There's the symbolic values systems that large carnivores like grizzly bears or brown bears and wolves instill in us. They mean many different things to people. And those are very important issues to focus on. There's also the habitat loss worldwide that's very important for large, wide-ranging species like brown bears, wolves, or lynx. But tonight, I'll focus on this part of human-caused mortality and how we can potentially reduce those impacts on large carnivores. This idea of minimizing human-caused mortality is particularly problematic in what I call contested landscapes. And it can be actually a conflict or a contest between those large carnivores, for example, brown bears, and people in those particular places. And those are particularly important in places that are outside of our national parks, where carnivore populations overlap with human activities, livestock, for example. Sheep in Slovenia is an issue. Sheep in Montana is an issue. And when there is a real or perceived risk to human safety. And this may be less of an issue in Europe, but more of an issue in North America. Okay, when we think about the United States, this is the state of Montana, which I'll be talking about today. But much like Europe, we've seen the retraction of habitat. We found bears all through the western United States at the turn of the century, and slowly the populations became fragmented and they were locally extirpated, and today we just have these small populations left in Montana. This is Glacier National Park, and down here our second largest population is here, and most of you have probably heard about Yellowstone National Park. So these are our two largest populations of bears. We have about 2% of the historic range is left for bears, and this makes this whole challenge of reducing conflicts and reducing bear mortality all the more important. Today, 2013, in the United States, we have about 1,200 to 1,400 brown bears. The good news is that population is slowly expanding, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my talk today. So we have the same genus and species as you do, Ursus arctos. We call it our grizzly bear, but most people in the world refer to this as the brown bear. The average weight of males in Montana is about 200 kilograms, and they can be up to about 400 kilograms, which would be a large bear. And this is fairly similar to what you have in Slovenia, maybe slightly bigger, but fairly comparable. Females are smaller, of course, about 130 kilograms on average in Montana. They will breed at about 4 or 5 years of age, and they will raise, on average, about 2.8 cubs. So that's between 1 and 4. One of the largest number of cubs that we have recorded in Yellowstone National Park, one female had 5 cubs. But that's pretty rare. We usually don't see that. Okay, so I just want to redirect you to where I've been working for the last 8 years or so in Montana. We were looking, Miha and I were looking at the map last night. We estimated you could put, I think, about 7 or 8 Slovenias inside of my home state of Montana. So it's quite a bit bigger, but it's very similar kind of challenges that you have. And I'll be talking about particularly this region here, and particularly this area to the south, where we have bears moving out of. This is a large forested area, and there's very little human settlement or activity in this area. We're seeing more and more bears spending time outside on agricultural lands and in small villages, and we have to deal with those sorts of issues. So there are many, I mentioned earlier, there's the symbolic and cultural issues, there's habitat loss, and there's human-caused mortality when it comes to bears. I think we have to think about habitat loss. That's a really important issue, and what this means with climate change impacting habitats in the future. But some of the big challenges I think we face in both Montana and Slovenia, and again, the focus of my talk tonight will be on how do we reduce conflicts. And I would ask the question, I guess, can we create human communities that can coexist with large carnivores like brown bears? And I think it's a fair question, and it takes work, and I'll talk about some of the tools that we used to get there. Again, this is where I'm living. We call this the Blackfoot Valley of Montana. You might have seen the film, A River Runs Through It. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a popular American movie about fishing. And we've got this beautiful river running through it. Now we have brown bears running through this area as well. And bears they were there historically, but we've seen more and more activity in the last 10 to 12 years. So we'll be focusing again. This is an area outside of a large protected area, and this is Glacier National Park. And we've got small villages in this community, and it's about 600,000 hectares where we're working, and I'll get into some of those details. Again, about 600,000 hectares. We have small ranching operations, and this is still, I wouldn't call it the Wild West, but it's certainly the West. We have cowboys, we have ranchers, and they are raising mainly cattle. And we call it a cow-calf operation. You have mother cows and calves, and they raise them up each year, and they sell them in the fall. They're all being born right now at this time of year, and this is called a typical cow-calf ranching operation. We have some forestry, like you do here in Slovenia. We have some tourism, and we have, it's a rural, sparsely populated. We have a low population density in this area, and that's been beneficial to grizzly bears. I thought it would just be nice for you to see a few pictures of the area. Again, these are some of our small town. This is the town of Ovando. This gets you an idea of the mountains. Again, a small village here. This is called Helmville. And again, these are Montana ranchers out here. This is branding, which is a way you identify each calf so you know how many are in your herd and you can keep track of them and all that sort of thing. Again, this is sort of just to give you an idea of what it looks like. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I work with a couple of different NGOs, non-governmental organizations. One that I've worked with closely is called the Blackfoot Challenge, and this is a NGO group that's made up of many different partnerships and different state and federal agencies. For example, we would partner, say, with the U.S. Forest Service, which is a federal agency that would be comparable to the Slovenian Forest Service. We work with universities, like the University of Ljubljana, state agencies, private landowners, corporations, businesses. We try to bring the whole community of people and different interests who are involved in this part of Montana together to work on many different types of natural resource issues. One thing that we've really worked hard on over the last 10, 15 years is communicating. I can't overemphasize how important. It sounds simple, but it's often hard in practice, that you bring the different stakeholders or the different interest groups together to communicate regularly. We collaborate on many different projects. That helps build trust. So communication, collaboration, trust building, and this is where you get your positive outcomes. And I'll talk a bit about some of those outcomes in a minute. Okay, so I hope I've painted a small picture for you. We've got a rural agricultural community, and bears had historically been there, but bears had been extirpated from large parts of the country, as I showed earlier. They were relegated to those very small areas. But now, in the 1990s, bears began to come back. And we saw more and more bear activity. Again, these are big forested wilderness, wild areas, and bears are starting to come down and spend more and more time down here, all in these river and creek bottoms, coming into the villages, and all of these green locations are conflicts. And we had a situation 10 years ago that is not dissimilar to the situation here in Slovenia today. We had bears coming in and getting into garbage, and we had very little waste or garbage management going on. So bears were finding this, making problems. We had lots of open containers like this. We had bears that were being attracted to cabins, and this is a trailer breaking in. And this was not good. The people were very concerned about this. There's wonderful beekeeping tradition in Slovenia. We have the same in Montana. In fact, Montana produces about a fourth of all the honey produced in the United States. So beekeeping is a big deal in Montana, and bears certainly get in and destroy beehives. And they really like the larva. That's the best treat. The honey, I just say that's sort of the icing on the cake. It's that larva in there that's really high in carbohydrates and proteins that those bears seek out and exploit. And they'll learn this behavior, and we'll see this again and again. Again, 1990s, we've seen conflicts were starting to increase, and these are some of the conflicts that were happening. This is a bear that's finding bird. If people feed birds, and they find the bird seed, and they get this again. And we were having livestock losses, so dead calves, bears were killing sheep, and it was becoming a real problem for the whole community. We had bears coming in to what we call boneyards or carcass dumps. These, you can see these are the remains of some calves or cows that have died naturally. if you come to the United States, and if I take you to Montana, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, I could take you to any of these states, and we take you to a typical ranch, and almost every ranch in the western United States has what we call a boneyard. And this is where dead animals are thrown. And it's perfectly legal to do this in our country. But if you leave these attractants or these carcasses, it attracts bears in. It's like going to your favorite restaurant that you like to go to. These bears remember this, and they come there again and again. There's not a problem necessarily with a bear scavenging on a carcass. Oftentimes, it comes into very close proximity to the ranch, and then it starts killing live calves, or then it finds garbage. And this is a cycle that we don't want to have happen. And this was happening in the 1990s and early 2000s in Montana. In fact, we had many females with cubs that were teaching their cubs to visit all of these ranches year after year, and they were getting into repeated conflicts, and we had problems. When those conflict cycles become so bad, the authorities end up trapping. Sometimes they'll relocate bears. Oftentimes bears are killed. And this is what we call a management removal. This is done by the authorities. And it's typically the result of all of these sort of conflicts that I just showed you. Something we try to avoid. Okay, and I've showed you this is what was happening. Bears are recolonizing this landscape. Conflicts were starting to get extremely high, and a lot of concern from the local community. Okay, we'll keep going. Now, what to do? What do we do? Now, this is too much text. I don't want to get into all of these details, but what I just wanted to direct you to is I see two sort of major ways to address this problem. You can try to manage bears and bear behaviors, and certainly this will happen. We will do some of this. But more and more, I think the more modern way is to manage human practices, or what we call in the United States, human behaviors. But you must fundamentally ask yourself the question, and every country might be slightly different. You have different management regimes you have to work under. But I think this is an important way to think about this. What is a socially acceptable way to address this issue? Managing human behaviors and practices, or managing bear numbers and bear behaviors? These are different ways of looking at this. They're certainly integrated. You're not going to just do one or the other, but you have to think about what you might want to emphasize. And in our community, we decided that we would try to manage our human practices. And of course, we're going to continue to do some of this on the bear side of things, but we had support to work on this area, and I'll show you some of the specific practices that we changed over time. What did this emphasize? When we worked with the local community to listen to them about what was important to them, they told us, we want to prevent conflicts, we want to protect human safety, and perhaps most importantly, we want to protect livelihoods. Montana ranchers are not rich people. Every calf matters. If you're a beekeeper, every apiary matters, and so livelihoods are very important, and we take that very seriously in all the work we do. We want these ranchers on the land. They have some incredible, these are large ranches, they have incredible habitat. So keeping these ranchers in business is actually good for bears, it's good for other wildlife. And you could ask me more about that if you can talk about that some more. One of the first things we did, and I think you can probably do this in Salunia quite easily, is getting an idea of where your conflicts are happening and where those land use practices are happening. And for example, I sat down with the ranching community for about a year and a half, and we mapped out in, say, for example, blue here, where are all those small baby calves being born? What pastures are they being put out into here in red? Those are those boneyards I mentioned earlier, where bears coming down in these rivers and coming into all of these boneyards. And this is just an example. We've got a huge geographic information system inventory of mapping, and I won't get into it tonight, but we wanted to know what are people doing on the landscape, and where does that interface with bears, and where are those conflicts happening? Once you do that, you can actually assign numerical risk factors to this, which is very nice, and you can talk about percentages, the probabilities of having conflicts, what we call conflict hotspots. And I won't spend a lot of time tonight on this, but it's a very nice way to mathematically show where you might want to focus some of your efforts. And I will talk tonight about some of our core programs: fencing, carcass removal, bringing people together as neighbors, and then waste and garbage management. Okay. So once we did some of the mapping, we knew where we wanted to focus some of our issues. We have built dozens and dozens of electric fences to protect those calves and cows from bears. And typically there's just some examples of the technical pieces of it. They're about 152 centimeters high. What's been very important is having them alternating with the hot current, ground, hot, ground, hot. And this has been very important. As a bear tries to come through these wires, it grounds itself out, and that's what creates that shock. Doesn't kill the bear, and it deters the bear. And we've had very good success protecting sheep and calves with these sort of fences. This is just an example of some of the testing that we like to do. We like to make sure these things work. And we had a carcass inside, and this is a bear trying to get in, and the bear could not access this. What's been very rewarding over time is to see ranchers developing their own tools. Now, experts can talk and talk and talk and tell people what to do, and local people, Montana ranchers, enough. You know, they hear this, and they might not even listen. But if you build trust, I talked about collaboration, communication, collaboration, and trust building. We've got, this takes time. After 5 or 6, 7 years of this, you've got people like Jim Stone and Jim Bauer building their own fencing systems that they can use on their ranches. And this is pretty exciting for us as a conservation biologist to see local people starting to take initiative for finding solutions. And this is just an example. These are the fence posts that can be very quickly erected, and you can put up these portable fencing systems. And this is perfect for a situation when you just need a fence for 2 or 3 weeks. You have a bear coming into a village. You have, say, for example, fruit trees, apples. Lots of apples in Montana, same thing here in Slovenia. Very nice way to very rapidly deploy portable fencing to non-lethally deter bears. I mentioned our beehives. This is a map showing all of the different licensed beehives all through the state of Montana. If you're a bear and you come out of these large protected areas, for example here, it's statistically, it's very easy to bump into a beehive. And so how do we take care of the problem? We use this solar-powered, again, hot, cold fence like this. Very, very successful to deter bears. This just shows some of those distributions of the conflicts, and these are bear observations, and we wanted to focus our efforts on those conflict hotspots. As I mentioned, from 2003 to 2013, we've protected about 85 beehives. 18 calving areas have those fences, and we've been working on, I'll talk a bit about a composting facility, and these transfer sites. These are where waste is temporarily contained. And we've done this largely for free with the ranching community and our local politicians and the community at large. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about removing those carcasses. I showed you earlier that picture of the bear coming in to those boneyards. Again, this is a practice that had been going on for about 150 years in the United States, still goes on. Something we wanted to stop. It's also very effective, by the way, to keeping wolves from coming into ranches, but we're talking tonight about bears. But we had to figure out a way. How can we stop all these carcasses from being found by bears? So, solution, we have a truck. And again, this is where partnerships are important. We have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, a federal agency, donating the truck each year, paying for the diesel fuel. And we go around to the ranches from February to May, twice a week. We go and pick up and remove those carcasses from those ranches. We take them to a composting facility. And I don't know if you've had dinner, maybe you guys eat later. But it might sound revolting, but it works very well. To compost these carcasses with wood chips and water, and it produces a very rich soil byproduct that you can use, and the transportation department in Montana uses this for roadside revegetation project. The ranchers in Montana really like this because it's a natural process. Before we were bringing carcasses to a landfill, and people didn't like this idea. But this is a more natural way to reuse, compost, and it's been a very effective way to dispose of those carcasses. Just wanted to point out we have an electric fence around this facility so that bears don't come here in the first place. We've expanded this program in Montana to many other areas. We've removed, since 2003, about 4,300 carcasses, again, that would otherwise attract bears and wolves into conflicts. And I've mentioned we started the composting in 2007, and that's been a great way to dispose of those carcasses. We work very concertedly on waste management or garbage protection. We do not want bears accessing human garbage at villages and at people's homes. This is a captive bear that's testing one of our products. We want to make sure that we don't put products into the field that will fail and cause problems, and then people will not want to adopt that sort of technology if it's not working. So obviously you have to make sure that they work well. I just wanted to show you some different examples too. You don't always have to buy bear-resistant containers. These are local solutions that local people have put together. You can put different types of containment systems around your garbage. And this is simple, just a couple of examples of local residents taking initiative to solve the problem. And these can be very cost-effective as well. Again, I showed you some of those early examples of easily accessible garbage. Here are some solutions that we've put together. This is a barrier fence, and then again we've got an electric fence that goes around the entire site that keeps bears out of this. Here's another way you can do it. You can put these types of doors down on those dumpsters. Again, every village might be a little different. The key here is being creative and figuring out how to contain garbage. It's pretty simple stuff. The other thing we've done, it's been very low cost, is we've been linking people together. We call it a neighbor network. And every square here is a different house. And we've had volunteers. They will call each other. They will email each other. They might even be texting. We don't have a great cell service here, and who knows if they're using Facebook. But at the very least, these are neighbors who call each other up on the telephone. We have a volunteer for every neighbor cluster, and when a bear is, say, coming onto near your neighborhood, we do the simple calling up your neighbors, and people will take in their bird seed or take in their pet food or make sure their garbage is contained. Very low cost, high return way to have people invested in living alongside species like bears. Okay, so I pose this question and this challenge of, can we coexist? Can you help communities coexist? So you put all of those tools together: fencing, garbage management, carcass removal, neighbor networks, people working together. Can you actually reduce conflicts? That's the question, and build a community of coexistence. Our project began in earnest in 2002. I mentioned those conflicts were increasing. By 2010, we have reduced the conflicts by 96%. Last year, we had 5 minor conflicts. In 2012, 2011, we had another 5 very minor conflicts. So conflicts have been decreasing while the bear population has been increasing at about 3% per year. So conflicts are down, the bear population is up, and what we're seeing is bears using the landscape with very few conflicts with people, foraging on natural bear foods instead of finding all of those types of attractants that are associated with human activities. And I mentioned earlier, when you have all those conflicts, you end up having to kill bears. Well, this has been very rewarding to see a decrease of 80% decline in grizzly bear mortality. The need to kill bears because of conflicts has decreased dramatically. We had no mortalities in 2012 or 2011. So again, we're encouraged that these are some small steps for helping people and bears share this landscape. Again, just an example of a global positioning system or GPS collared bear using both that forested area and a significant amount of time down here in our valley bottoms, living on these ranches without having any trouble with people. I will end my talk by sharing some lessons that we've learned and that may or may not be relevant to Slovenia. Maybe it's something we can talk about. Some lessons to consider that we found over the years. We wanted to make sure that the goals that we articulated were community shared goals. We wanted to make sure we listened to the community. One of the very first things we did was spent a lot of time listening to the community in meetings. We did our mapping. We needed to learn what people were doing. We needed to be respectful. We wanted to learn from the local people. And we needed to ask people, what do you think? What do you think we should do? We wanted people to be invested in understanding the problem and helping find some of those solutions. At the end of the day, this was all sort of encapsulated in this idea of reducing risk. And this was a goal that the community could support. We focused on changing practices. We didn't necessarily try to change people's values about bears. This wasn't what I like to say a full frontal assault on your sort of Weltanschauung. You're not going to change people's worldviews overnight. We really wanted to focus on people's practices. Can we put fences around a calving area, for example? Can we remove carcasses? Again, these are small steps that had been successful. We wanted to make sure we had open meetings. We wanted to make sure we always asked the question, who needs to be here? That is the quickest way, in the United States at least, to lose trust, is if people feel excluded. So we wanted to make sure these were open and that we had all the stakeholders at the table. I mentioned how important protecting people's livelihood interests. You could also look at this another way. We've spent about 75,000 euro on average per year on this project. That's created jobs. And so I think that's been another way the local community has benefited from some of our work. And we've kept the projects extremely low to no cost for residents. When we pick up those carcasses, that's free. When we provide some of those bear-resistant trash containers, that's been free. And so that's been an important way for us to get some of these practices adopted and out on the ground. We've worked at the scale of, again, these are just showing some bear observations. We've had to work at a very large scale, about 320,000 hectares, to match the movement and those home ranges of those bears over time. We've worked very well with our local wildlife management agency, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. We've had great partners, people like Jamie Jonkel, who have been willing to share some of that decision authority, particularly on proactive projects. We're not asking to manage the bears. We just want to be in a partnership with our state agencies, and that's been extremely effective to work that way. We've had terrific leadership from ranchers who have been able to talk to some of our politicians in Washington, D.C. to help get our message out to the right people. It helps bring resources. That's very critical for getting all this work done. And successful carnivore management ultimately is about people. It's about their attitudes, it's about their behaviors, and it's about their practices. And I would just encourage, as you wrestle with these issues in Slovenia, Miha and I were talking about this, when you're talking about recovering bears or wolves, it's probably 90% people, 10% biology. Bears and wolves are very good at doing what they need to do to live. It's really a lot about managing people and our expectations and our values and how we want to live with these large, challenging species. So I've had some great opportunities to spend some time in Slovenia this week. And there's many pieces to the challenges that you face. But it just struck me one small step that what you might want to take would be with some of the garbage and waste management. We visited a few of these places, and as I've hopefully showed, there are ways to significantly reduce those problems. And one place to maybe begin would be with some garbage and waste management. Not hard. It takes some time, and it takes some time building those partnerships to get to those sort of solutions. So I would say, voila, and I want to say a very special thanks to the University of Ljubljana, Forestry Department, and the Slovenian Forest Service. I'm very excited tomorrow to go into the field with Rock and Marco and Rock. And as Miha very generously thanked, the IBA is helping begin this new exchange between the U.S. and Slovenia. And we'll see where it goes. And Team Slovenia last weekend at Planica, I'm very impressed. Okay, so Hvala. Thank you very much.
Vprašanje, v angleščini, če ima pa kdo v slovenščini, pa tudi bomo prevedali. Moče še ena stvar sem vzal prej omeniti, če je Sefi, ki je bil mlad, je bil skakalec. Tako da, v tem smo malo prilagodili čas njegova obiska, da nica videl.
I have a question.
Sure.
What bear densities are we talking about in your park?
In the area that I'm working in, we have probably 50 to 60 bears on about 320,000 hectares. Yeah.
So that's actually low compared to what we have here.
Yeah. Other questions? Sure.
And what is human density, human population density per square kilometer approximately?
Oh, I'd have to. It's low. I can't give you I can't give you a specific answer. We have about 5,000 residents in this area, so it's very low. Over about 7 different communities, so extremely low density of people. Yeah. Sure.
Can you explain a little bit more how to motivate people for engagement?
Did everyone hear that question? How do you motivate people for engagement?
Yeah, in the project.
Yeah. You know, that's a big question. Big question. How much time do we have? No, I think in Montana, people don't like being told what to do. And I think the quickest way to slow down progress is to assume you have all the answers and to come in telling people what to do. Sometimes that's necessary, but I think in certain cases, we've really worked to build trust and ask people, what do you think? What can you do? I think it's very important that the problem is understood by both the management and the conservation side and those people that have to live with the bears. Because if it's not a problem for the local villager, but it's a big problem for the authorities, it's very hard to find solutions. So I think, does that make sense? Trying to understand how the problem is being defined.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, how did you motivate people that they participated in these projects? Why didn't they call for reducing bear numbers? And you said that changing values is difficult, so I assume they are not very fond of bears, and that you focus on practices. But why didn't they just, I don't know, try to advocate for
reducing, say, bear numbers?
Yeah.
Well, good question. In the United States, bears are still protected under a variety of laws, so it's illegal to simply kill a bear, only in self-defense. And the authorities are still. We have no hunting of bears right now in the United States, brown bears in Montana in the United States, and so it's actually difficult to do that under the current management. And so one of the ways we got people to be engaged is some of this comes down to economics, and we offered most of all of our programs are free, so that was a strong motivator, but I guess you ask a great question, but it takes time, and we wanted to make sure that the local community we were listening to how they thought of the problem, and I guess I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but we wanted to make sure that they were invested in the solutions, and so if you could make some of those solutions free, that's very helpful. But maybe we can talk in some more detail after. It's a good question, though. More questions? Sure.
Carcasses are allowed, right?
Yes.
What about other food, like corn or something? Do you feed them with anything else?
We don't feed them on purpose, but certainly we have bears that will find corn, and they will come into the cornfields or into other crops like barley, but it's not we typically do not feed bears. We feed them inadvertently, if we leave garbage, of course. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Clement.
And what was the scale of these farms? For example, this boneyard seems
Yeah.
to me similar as the supplemental feeding basis we maintain in Slovenia, the one supplemented with carrion.
Sure.
Though we use them just in opposite.
Yeah. Right.
We do it oppositely.
Mhm.
We believe that we should
Yeah.
work oppositely.
Mm.
So how far away from the herd, for example, these boneyards were?
Oh, that's typically, less than 2 kilometers, sometimes only 1 kilometer, sometimes 500 meters from a ranch center. So very close. The reason they're close is that people are, this time of year when all the calves are being born and you have 3 or 4 losses, it takes time to drag them far away. So they end up being located very close. Some ranchers will move them maybe 2 kilometers at most, but most of these are less than 1 kilometer from the ranch. We can actually calculate I've got this exact number if you want to see that. But typically close. Yeah. So it brings bears right into a conflict situation. Yeah, it's a great question.
Seth, are
Marco,
there
sure.
any encounters with people, and what is the procedure? How do you handle it afterwards?
Okay, the questions are, do we have encounters? Yeah, absolutely. We have, it depends on, most of the encounters are human meets bear, bear flees. They might report it, they might not. We've had very few, we had one human fatality, 2001, in this region, and that was over a carcass. A hunter was dressing at his elk, red deer, and a female mauled him, and he died trying to get back to his pickup truck. Your question, is there a standard procedure? It depends on how severe the encounter or potential mauling is. Whether it's just human injuries. Often the authorities might try to find the bear, but it's often hard to potentially find that bear. So it varies depending on the severity of the incident. Does that answer your question?
Thanks.
Okay. Sure. Thomas?
What's considered a conflict?
Yeah, good question. I try to articulate a few of those in early conflicts. Usually when there's livestock losses, it's conflicts, beehive damage, bear that's showing signs of habituation and is very close proximity to someone's house, might be in their garden, that's a conflict. Human encounter situation, it gets reported, that's a conflict. Garbage, a bear accessing garbage repeatedly, that would be logged as a conflict. Whole spectrum, bird feeders, garbage, losses, beehives. Clement.
Yeah.
Sure.
Remember I mentioned in your lecture that the bears learn to come to those feeding places from probably cut from a mother and so on.
Yeah.
When you, for example, prevent bears to come to boneyards, or when you remove the dead cows, or protect the beehives, do you have any clue what was the reaction of the bears which were habituated before to such kind of food? So do they still enter in those areas and learn again that there is no reward for them anymore? Or
well, that's a good question. We didn't have, at the time, many of those, we didn't have radio collars. We didn't have the funding, the ability to track exactly what was happening with those bears. Some of those bears that were getting into repeated conflicts were removed from the population. That's part of the reason we see some of the decline in conflicts. I think it's a very fair question, and it would be, it would be nice in a perfect world. We would have had 25 or 30 of our bears radio collared. We would have had our intervention in 2002, and then we could watch what happens. Are they just now foraging on natural food, or what proportion are coming back into conflict? That gets very expensive.
yeah.
But it's a good question.
But was there any delay between, for example, new management of everything and then increased damages or problems, or the problem decreased straight after you start to manage behavior and so on?
It seemed like within 2 years we were really seeing a reduction in conflicts, 2 to 3 years. And what's encouraging is it's maintaining this very low conflict trend right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So when you started this program, you went out with old guns and started educating how to manage garbage, the importance of degradation and everything, or did you do it in steps?
Great question. I don't know if everyone heard that. Did we try everything at once, or did we take some small steps? It was sequential. Some of the first projects we did were the fencing of the calving areas, and when ranchers saw bears coming in at night and trying to get into the calving areas but being deterred by the fence, that was very important. They really liked seeing the eyes of the bears at night outside of their fence. They felt much safer. Once they started talking about this, more and more ranchers got involved. So fencing was one of our important first steps, and then the carcass removal was a really important one. That got people very excited. It was something they had to deal with, all these dead carcasses. They didn't want to deal with it anyway. Once we did the fencing and the carcasses, then we were able to work on some of the sanitation. Was about year 3 or 4 we started getting more involved with the sanitation. So yeah, that's a nice question. Sure.
You said that you put fences around the garbage containers and so on. I don't mean the electric fences, but the other ones. They are made of wood, or I don't know.
Sure.
What.
Yeah, just some. Yeah.
Were there any bear injuries? I mean, suddenly they don't have access anymore.
Not that I know of.
There were no signs of, I don't know, blood or something.
No.
Because some bears try really hard here in Slovenia to get to or something.
Sure. Not that I know of. We've had. Yeah. No, I can't think of any examples where we have known evidence of bear injuries. I think we know bears are being temporarily shocked by our fences, but it's not causing any long-term injury. Believe me, I've touched the fence. I know. It's a shock, but it's not going to kill you. Yeah. Sure, Thomas.
Speculation. Do you think you would be able to convince the ranchers to do this extra work if killing bears was a viable option?
It's a good question. Most Montana ranchers I know are extremely busy, so they are not going to take the time to go out and shoot the bears themselves unless they are catching the bear right in the act of killing their livestock. They can do this with wolves. Let's just take another example. So you can do this with wolves. You can kill a wolf that is in the act of molesting or attempting to kill calves. Wolves have recolonized the Blackfoot since 2006, and since in the last 7 years, I have 2 examples of. There's been 2 times a rancher has been able to shoot a wolf that's been in the act of killing us. So it's very low. It's a good question, though. I mean, hunters are doing some. And let's just stay on the wolf question just for a second. In the Blackfoot, we had 20 wolves harvested through hunting and some trapping this last year. So the hunting community can do some of this. Yeah.
Did anybody there put some question out? What is the landscape look with all those fences? You showed many slides there because many of those fences are, let's say, static ones, not removable.
Yes.
And this is one question, and the other one is if there is a conflict, the play is changing. If you put fences, obviously there is not all of the farmers or farms probably fenced. And
no.
If the bears switch the area of conflict, maybe.
Well, to answer your first question, we definitely thought about this in terms of wood. I guess I should step back, and I didn't explain it very well, so it's a great question. The size of those fences is relatively small. Those calving area fences are very small. It's not habitat. These are impacted pastures that are been used repeatedly each year, so you're not taking away habitat, and in most of our cases we are not blocking, say, ungulate, a deer or elk movement. They are, let's see, some of our largest perimeter fences are, let's see, about 1.2 kilometers, 1.3 kilometers. That would be the largest. The smallest are, less than a kilometer. So they're not large. So you're not taking away habitat. And in certain cases, we can drop the fence heights down so that deer can move over them. So you're not blocking them. We've done this too. We've reduced the fence heights. Keep bears out, allow deer and elk to move through. Has this shifted? And that's a great question, Marco. Have we shifted the conflicts just to other ranches? That's your second question? No. We're seeing a lot of these resident bears using the habitat, and it's not having conflicts with people. So we're not just moving the conflict to some other part. And that was a worry. We didn't quite know would this happen, and so you have to be thoughtful about it for sure. You're very polite. Sure.
About the ranching, so you
Sure.
have more cattle ranching or sheep ranching or rangers?
Mostly cattle ranching.
How
Yeah.
high? 60, 70?
I would say 85, 90% are all cattle ranching. The sheep and bears is a hard one. Yeah. Yeah. It's in Montana we say that sheep are popcorn for our bears. But I don't say, So the sheep industry has been in decline in most of the U.S. in the last 20 years. So it's been, I suppose, hard if you're in the sheep industry, but beneficial if you're a bear or a wolf. Sure.
Do you have any problems with poachers in your country?
Do we have problems with poachers? We have a small problem with poaching. It's nothing like gallbladder, black bear gallbladder trade issues. In the last 10 years that I've been working, we've had very few cases of poaching. We had one bear that was poached and the paws were cut off and taken, but very little, which is good, mostly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what about other people coming in this area? Is there any tourism, or how do you handle, let's say, information? How do you pass the information of safety behavior toward bears to other people?
Great
Are there
question.
any signs or let's say?
No, that's a great question. Did everyone hear that? How do you manage the general public, the recreating public who's going to come in?
Yeah, you said the river runs through.
Oh yeah, we get people who are fishing. The good news is most of the guides that are, the river guides or the hunting guides, they're smart and they have good knowledge of proper. They carry bear spray, bear pepper spray. But it's hard. We get people from California coming in hunting in grizzly bear, brown bear country, and they may not have a very good idea of what. And so we can't manage all of that risk. And I definitely worry about that. I worry about some of those encounter situations. We do some outreach. Our state wildlife managers do a good job. We have signs, but so often we have so much information in today's world coming at us that it's very easy to forget about this. That's a good question. We could do a better job, I think, on that probably. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Thomas. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that your projects were oriented into changing practices. Here, conservation projects often have huge parts devoted to awareness raising
Sure.
or stuff like that. I'm just curious if you went down this road, or just completely said this is not worth it. But just
we just really focused on. We wanted to focus on the practical pieces that those specific management practices that we thought we could change with very little impact to those rangers. I mean, you're not going to get people. Carnivores are challenging enough, and they're not going to just do this if you ask them to do it. Would you build a 10,000 euro fence on your farm? No way. Maybe I showed you a few examples of some ranchers developing their own innovations. This takes some time, but we wanted to really see can you make the large-scale community, can you actually get this to scale up at the right, quickly and have a reduction in conflicts? And to do that, we really offered those practical solutions that were cost-effective, they were free. So we didn't go down the whole road. I think that's a great question. How much return will you get on the investment in that type of direction? I think it depends. It depends on your audience. It depends who you're working with. You might need to do that in Slovakia or Slovenia, France, depending on the situation. But we decided not to. Yeah. No, that's a good question. Sure.
Another question.
Yeah.
For these neighbor networks, what's the motivation? Is the love of bears or helping fellow human?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a bit of both. Some of the community organizers and the volunteers we have, they really like bears, and they don't want them to have conflicts and die. Other folks who are involved in that are just very practical. They just think this is it's smart. So it's not necessarily love of bears. It's not wanting a bear on your front porch, in the village. It's just practical. Yeah, so a bit of both.
You mentioned beer pepper spray.
Yeah.
Could you explain how it works? How
Sure.
How to use it?
Yeah. Did everyone hear that question? Is this notion of bear pepper spray? How many people have ever heard of bear pepper spray? Okay. So it's it's a canister of capsaicinoids, I think I'm not pronouncing it properly. Capsaicin spray you wear it on your hip, and it's charged with a propellant. I don't know the translation, but it creates a reaction for the bear's smell. It paralyzes the bear. It gets into its eyes and nose, and it shoots a big cone of hot pepper charged spray into the bears. Mia, maybe can you explain that a bit better in Slovenian? Maybe what the bear pepper spray, the ingredient. I'm not sure.
Ja, potom vse skupaj kot en sprej za grafite.
Yeah.
Ne špricamo barve, ampak v bistvu tako kapsicin, mislim, da
Capsaicins, yeah.
It's
like mace, yeah.
It's good
Mace.
to use it with the wind or.
Yeah. Yeah. Do not you do not use it with the wind. It's very bad. Yeah. But it's it shoots a big cone, and so we talk to people. It's a large area, and it's much easier to hit a bear with that than with a bullet if a bear is running at you. You very likely.
How often it is used? I mean, does it happen a few times each year, or is it regular use? People are using it every day when they go to forest, or
very low use. Very low use. There's a good paper. If you're interested, I'll get it to you by Steve Herrero. He tracked encounters in Alaska, and it was effective 98% of the time that it was used. And they had to use a data set that was like 20 years. I can show that to you. Very low use, but it's effective when it's used. I think, which is important. Yeah.
What's the general perception of bears in Montana? Are people indifferent, or they prefer bears?
Okay, the question is about general perceptions of bears in Montana. I think Montanans generally like their bears. Yeah, they don't like their bears when the bears are, getting into issues and causing problems. And, there's a fair number who are actually scared of bears. But I think generally, we see bears all over in iconography, in our art, our stores. We use them to market things. I think generally it's a fairly positive attitude. Yeah. People are proud that we still have healthy populations of bears. And it's even better, I think, when you can reduce the conflicts and feel safer around bears. And that's really important, to feel safe around bears. There's some of these ways that can help you do that. Yeah.
These measures that you take
Sure.
to reduce conflict,
Yeah.
do they also help wolves?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the fencing has been extremely useful on the calving areas. So the electric fencing has been very useful, and the carcass management, the carcass removal, has been very beneficial. We have another program. We do a very intensive monitoring of livestock. We call it range riding, or a range rider program. We spend a lot of time with the livestock. We lose about right now on about 300,000 hectares in our main project area, and we have about 10 wolf packs, 40 to 50 wolves. We're losing 3.2 livestock per year to wolves. 3.2 animals total across about 40 ranches.
That's not a lot, right?
Right. It's quite low. There are probably 6 to 8 per year that are likely wolves, but you can't find the carcasses because they've just disappeared. So, but the ones we can confirm, about 3.2 per year. Very low, and we feel that our bear work has been very beneficial to the wolves. Yeah. Yeah. Thomas. Yeah, sure. No, they're interesting.
You're saying we have 40 to 50 wolves?
Yeah.
And last year, the legal harvest was 20 or so.
20, yeah.
Quite high.
It was quite high. It was just, they've been increasing the number in Montana. The state has decided to reduce the number of wolves from about 750 to about 450 to 500 wolves. Those numbers, none of our packs were fully eliminated. It was interesting. The hunting pressure tended to spread that hunter kill across the packs. So I'm curious to see what that will do to some of the social structure in those packs. And if you've taken out alpha male or alpha females, will you have younger wolves more likely to come into conflicts this coming year with our livestock? We'll see. We don't know. I'm curious. Yeah.
Are you doing some research in that direction?
We haven't addressed that specific. Maybe you come and help us. Yeah? Are you busy? Good. Come on. See, we can learn from each other. Yeah, no, not specifically. There's a lot to do.
So why was the culling number raised?
Sorry?
Why was the number raised?
That's a good question. Okay, it's the state of Montana, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. It's our state wildlife management agency. I would say the main reason has been as a response to the hunting community in Montana that would like to have more access to deer and elk. So it's been a response to that to reduce the numbers. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the wolf has been delisted?
Correct.
So that's after delisting?
Correct. Yes, this is allowing the state to have much more management control over the wolves. Yeah. 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 Sure. Please.
With the fencing.
Yes.
You probably know what the Slow Wolf project is doing with some farms getting fences.
I've heard a little. Yeah, I've heard a little.
Would you, from what you heard, would you say that this will spread from your experience, or that how quickly did it spread among your farmers? Was it the information going from one farmer to another because they trust them more than they trust you? How long did it take?
It took us. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it sort of helps come back to your question, too, the engagement. We have and I didn't have the time to explain all of the pieces of this, but we have a farmer or rancher group that we meet regularly, 3-4 times a year. And so we bring everyone together to talk about this, and they talk to each other. They have the management, the biologists are in the same room. We have dinners together, and I think those regular meetings, they definitely talk, and they talk among themselves. And if they didn't work, there's no way it would have ever spread. But it took, to put all of those together, it probably took 3 to 5 years. It took some time. But it was essential to have, you're right on. Who is the messenger and what the message is critical, important. Much more likely, much better if ranchers are talking about the benefits to other ranchers. hunters are talking to other hunters. Municipal mayors or local political elites are talking to one another. That's been a very important piece of this, the communication. So thank you. That's a great question.
The compensation.
Yes.
If I was skilled, was how high? If you make it to the market value, I mean.
Correct.
Compared to the market value.
For a 100%, for a confirmed loss, it was 100% of market value. Yeah. And we're working on in suspected cases, it's like a 75% of value. And each state's got a little different. They, if it's not 100% confirmed, but it's likely, they've got different. Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, they have little different cases if it's not 100%.
But never more than 100.
No. Sure.
How difficult is it for a farmer to claim the compensation? Is it a lot of paperwork, or is it just something they just...
No, the question is how difficult is it to make a claim and get paid? Usually it's about 10 to 12 days.
Okay, but
it's pretty efficient.
Before when they get...
Yeah, it's about 2 weeks. Yeah,
they have to fill in a lot of paperwork.
It's not too much. We have to make sure that there's an investigation, a wildlife forensic evaluation, and it's about 1 page, and it's turned in, and about 2 weeks it's turned around and they have a check. Yeah, it works pretty well. Clement.
Now you still have a lot of control over this, all these mitigation measures, and actually invest very good funds to do it. Do you believe that in time this will be some kind of self going on? Hope so, or can you make any guess on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Will this, how do you maintain this, and will it spread or be self-perpetuating? You're asking fundamentally, is this sustainable?
Yeah.
Sort of the question. I hope so. I think it takes, in the United States, it's a long process of, I think, relearning how to live with bears, and particularly now with wolves. And so, it's not going to be overnight. We're not seeing adoption just, we're not seeing it skyrocket in other parts of Montana yet. What's been encouraging, we're seeing many of our programs being transferred to Canada, to Alberta, but they have some of the funding to do that. So it's not necessarily the ranchers paying for it, but it's the provincial government right now in Alberta has a lot of money because of the tar sands and oil and gas exploitation. So they've got, there's money to do some of this work. So they're doing some of this. So I certainly would hope that more and more ranchers would adopt this and it becomes just part of the normal way of dealing with risk. But we're not there yet. I think we will need to see more time for this.
It's like inside the Blackfoot.
Yeah.
You're still investing, or it's like you're done?
We're still investing in the wolf side, but the bear with these bear conflict numbers dropping so much, now it's more of a monitoring phase. Yeah, we haven't built a new. We just did just 2 fences last year, but in years past we were doing 5, 6 fences per year. So it's slowed down. Yeah. So the amount of money involved is decreased on the bear side, which is nice.
How come you're investing so much in the wolves if you only lose like 4 animals per year?
Well, we just wanted to be responsive to the community. The community has desired this. The ranchers have said, we want you to work on the wolves, and so we do. And that's been very important, to be responsive to the community. Yeah, yeah. You guys are a very nice audience. Go ahead, Miha.
So, if you learn a bit about common things we have, like Slovenia, Montana, and also differences. So, how will you evaluate how effective this things that you're doing could be in Europe, in Slovenia?
So the question is,
Translate.
Miha's question is, so how, I'm learning a little bit about the situation here in Slovenia, how much of some of this would be relevant to Slovenia? Well, I think, some of the fencing from the small livestock, some of the sheep would probably be very applicable. I think some of the sanitation, the waste or garbage management would be very applicable. I think one of the challenges would be, the human densities are greater here. Some of these villages, I think you've got a lot more people. But I think you could start with some small demonstration projects. There's the issue and the question of bear feeding close to villages and the densities of bears. I would have to, defer to you guys. You guys would know what that might mean if you, perhaps if you were to slowly reduce some of the bear feeding and have some of that prevention going on at the same time. You might see a little more distribution of bears, maybe less localized densities in certain places. I don't know. I certainly think that the fencing and the garbage waste management would be two very fruitful areas that you could start, and I think you could see some results probably fairly quickly. That's just only being 1 week here, and I'm certainly not an expert on the situation here in Slovenia. That's why that's why these exchanges are important. That's how we would work in partnership to find out what makes most sense in your habitats with the local people here. Other questions? Or you've been very thoughtful. But I'm ready. I'll stay here. Team Montana, I'm ready. We can keep going. I'm just kidding. So I would say thank you so much. It's been very, very nice to be here, and I can't wait to have Miha Krofel and his colleagues come visit us in Montana, and I hope we can keep the exchange going. So, good. Okay. Voila. Thank you very much.